Chapter 2, Part 1 of The Metamorphosis, or Golden Ass. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Metamorphosis, or Golden Ass, by Apuleius, translated by Thomas Taylor. Chapter 2, Part 1. Soon as, the night being dispersed, a new sun had made the day, emerging at the same time from sleep and my bed, being likewise anxious and above measure desirous of knowing what is rare and admirable, and recollecting that I was in the midst of Thessaly, where the genuine incantations of the magical art are reported to have originated by the unanimous consent of the whole earth, I diligently considered the several particulars of that narration of my excellent companion Aristomenes, which was occasioned by the proximity of this city Hypata to Thessaly, though I was otherwise in suspense from the desire of seeing something wonderful, and my diligence in the investigation of it. Nor was there any thing in that city, which when I beheld I could believe to be that which it really was. But I was induced to think that everything was transmuted into another form by magical incantation, so that the stones which I met with were hardened into that shape from men. The birds which I heard singing had once been in the human form, but were now invested with feathers, and that this was also the case with the trees which were clothed with leaves, and surrounded the pomerium, or precinct of the town, and with the fountains of water which devolved their streams from the liquefied bodies of men. I now likewise expected to find that the statues and images would walk, that the walls would speak, that sheep and that kind of cattle would prophesy, and that an oracle would suddenly be given from heaven itself and the orb of the sun. Being thus astonished, or rather stupefied with tormenting desire, finding no beginning or even trace of the objects of my wish, I rapidly investigated every particular. Nevertheless, while, like one intoxicated, I wander through the whole town from one gate to another, I suddenly, and without knowing where I was, came to the market in which delicate provisions were sold. There, as I was walking quickly, I overtook a certain woman who was surrounded with a great number of servants. Her earrings and her garments were adorned with gold, in the former of which it was wreathed, and was woven in the latter, which demonstrated her to be a woman of the first rank. By her side there stood a very old man, who, as soon as he saw me, said, "This, by Hercules, is Lucius," and at the same time he kissed me. Immediately after, he whispered in the ear of the woman something which I did not hear. "Will you not," said he, "approach and salute your parent?" "I dare not," I replied, "salute a woman who is unknown to me." And immediately blushing, I stood still with my head inclined to the other side. But she, fixing her eyes upon me, said, "Behold the generous offspring of his most chaste mother, Salvia, and the other parts of his body also admirably and exactly correspond to each other. For his stature is graceful, his slenderness is succulent, his ruddiness is moderate, his hair is yellow and without affectation, his eyes are azure but quick, and the sight of them is sharp and vigorous like that of an eagle. In short, he is everywhere comely, and his gait is decorous and artless." She also added, "I have nursed you, O Lucius, with these my hands, and why should I not? For I not only participated with your mother of the same blood, but also of the same education, since we both originated from the lineage of Plutarch, have both of us sucked the milk of the same nurse, and have grown up together in the bonds of consanguinity. And there is no difference between us, except that which arises from dignity. For the marriage of your mother was illustrious, but mine was obscure. I am that Byrrhina, whose name you may perhaps recollect, because it was frequently celebrated among those by whom you were educated. Betake yourself, therefore, confidently to our place of abode, or rather to your own proper house." To this I replied, my bashfulness having been dissipated by the time which she consumed in speaking. Far be it from me, O mother, that I should desert my host Milo, without any just cause of complaint. But I will sedulously take care to do whatever can be done by me without violating the rights of hospitality. And as often as I have occasion to come this way, I will call upon you. While we were engaged in this friendly altercation, consisting of refusal on my part and invitation on hers, after we had proceeded a little farther, we came to the house of Byrrhena. The courtyard was most beautiful, which supported statues of the goddess of victory, raised on pillars which were quadripartite in the several angles. The wings of the statues being stretched on each side without any motion of the rolling sphere, and decorating the unstable step of the dewy feet, made the images seem as if they were not fixed, but were really flying. Behold, too, Parian marble, fashioned into a statue of Diana, was erected in the middle of the whole place. This image was perfectly splendid, for the garment of the goddess appeared as if it was blown back by the wind, and she seemed as it were to run, and to oppose those that were entering into the house. It was also venerable on account of the majesty of the divinity which it represented. Dogs stood on each side of the goddess, and these likewise were fashioned of marble. The eyes of these seemed to threaten. Their ears were erect, their nostrils were open, and their mouths ferocious. And if any barking had been heard from the neighbourhood, you would have thought it proceeded from the stony throats of the dogs. That also in which the excellent statuary had given the most consummate specimen of the carver's art was this, that the dogs being erect, and with their breasts advanced, the hind feet stood still, but the fore feet seemed to run. Behind the goddess a rock rose, after the manner of a cavern, covered with moss, grass, leaves, and sprigs. In one place vines, and in another shrubs flourishing from the marble. Within the rock the shadow of the goddess was resplendent from the brightness of the marble. In the extreme margin of the rock, apples and grapes hung exquisitely elaborated, which art, emulous of nature, represented similar to their exemplars. You would have thought that some of them might have been gathered for food, when autumn, the giver of wine, had breathed on them the colour of maturity. And if you beheld in a prone position the fountains, which, running under the feet of the goddess, vibrated in gentle waves, you would have thought that the clusters of grapes which hung from the vine, among other things in which they resembled reality, were also not destitute of mobility. In the midst also of the stony leaves was a carved Actaeon, looking behind him with prying eyes, and now invested with the brutal form of a stag, and both in the marble and in the fountain he was seen to be expecting the coming of Diana to bathe. While attentively inspecting these works of art, I was exceedingly delighted. All that you see, said Byrrhena, is yours. And immediately after she ordered with a low voice all the rest of her attendants to depart. And when all of them were gone, by this goddess, she said, my dearest Lucius, how exceedingly do I fear for you, and how much do I wish that you, who are as it were my son, may be well advised. Take care of yourself, but especially beware of the evil arts and nefarious blandishments of that Pamphile, the wife of Milo, whom you say is your host. She is one of the most renowned witches, and is believed to be mistress of every necromantic incantation, so that by branches of trees and stones, and other frivolous things of the like kind, when she has breathed on them with magic words, she knows how to merge into the depths of Tartarus, and into ancient chaos, all this light of the starry world. For as soon as she has beheld any youth of a beautiful form, she is captivated by his elegance, and immediately turns upon him the sight both of her eyes and of her mind. She employs blandishments, she invades his spirit, she binds him with the eternal fetters of profound love. Then, despising those who are not sufficiently obedient to her, and who rank among the vulgar, She changes them in a moment of time into stones and cattle, and any kind of beast, but others she entirely destroys. I tremble for you on account of these things, and entreat you to beware of them. For she burns with an eternal love, and you, through your youth and your beauty, are fitted for her purpose. This was what Byrrhæna, who was very solicitous for my welfare, said to me. But I, who was otherwise inquisitive, as soon as I heard the name of the magic art, which I always wished to obtain the knowledge of, was so far from dreading the blandishments of Pamphile, that I voluntarily longed to become a proficient in that science, even though at a great price, and to precipitate myself entirely, with an accelerated leap, into the gulf of magic. Hence I hastily and insanely liberated myself from her hand, as from a certain bond, and having speedily said farewell, I flew to the house of Milo. And while, like one deprived of intellect, I thus accelerate my pace, I said, Now, O Lucius, be vigilant and attentive to yourself, for now you have the wished-for opportunity, and you may satiate your mind with admirable tales, which you have long desired to do. Away then with puerile fears, strenuously encounter with the thing itself more nearly, abstain from venereal connection with your hostess, and religiously reverence the conjugal bed of the worthy Milo. Attack, however, with all your might the maidservant Fotis, for her form is elegant, her manners are facetious, and her conversation delightful. Yesterday evening, likewise, when you went to rest, she courteously brought you into the bedchamber, gently laid you in bed, very lovingly covered you, and having kissed your head, showed by her countenance how unwillingly she left you. And in the last place, she frequently stood still, turning herself and looking behind her. Let us therefore make advances to Fotis, as a thing good, felicitous, and fortunate, though it should not be salutary. While I thus determined with myself, I came to the gate of Milo, yet I did not find either Milo or his wife at home, but only my dear Fotis, who was preparing for her master and mistress a finely seasoned dish of minced meat, together with some broth. And I conjectured indeed by my smell, that she was making very savoury food. She herself being neatly dressed in a linen garment, and girded a little higher than usual under her breasts, with a red and very splendid band, stirred round with her beautiful hands that dish of minced meat, and as she frequently stirred it, the gradually vibrating motion of her loins, and the gentle agitation of the flexible spine of her back, produced a graceful undulation. On perceiving this, I was fixed in astonishment, and stood wondering, and at length I said to her, How beautiful and pleasing, my Fotis, is the motion of your loins in stirring that dish of meat. What honeyed broth are you preparing? Happy and more surely blessed he, who is permitted by you to dip his finger in it. Then she, who was otherwise a pleasant and merrily loquacious girl, said, Depart, O miserable man, far from me. Depart from my fire, for if the flame of my love should scorch you, though but in a moderate degree, you will be profoundly burnt. Thus speaking, she looked at me and laughed. I did not, however, depart from her, till I had diligently explored the whole form of her body. But why do I speak of other things pertaining to her, since it has ever been my only care sedulously to survey, in the first place, the head and the hair in public, and afterwards to enjoy them at home? In this decision I am confirmed by considering that this part of the body has a conspicuous position, and is the first thing that presents itself to our sight, and that the native splendour of the hair effects the same thing in the head, as the delightful colour of a beautiful garment in the other members of the body. Lastly, most women, in order to exhibit their native gracefulness and allurements, divest themselves of all their garments, and long to show their naked beauty, being conscious that they shall please more by the rosy redness of their skin, than by the golden splendour of their robes. But, though it is a thing not lawful to speak of, and may there never be so dire an example of such a thing, if you deprive a woman of the most surpassing beauty of her hair, and strip her face of its native elegance, though she were sent from the heavens, produced from the sea, and nourished in the waves, though, I say, she were Venus herself, surrounded by all the graces, and attended by the whole family of loves, girded with her cestus, fragrant with cinnamon, and dropping balsam as she moves, yet if she were bald, she would not be able to please her own Vulcan. How beautiful is the hair when it is of a pleasing colour, shines with a glittering light, is vividly refulgent when opposite to the rays of the sun, or is more mildly resplendent, and varies its appearance in a different gracefulness. At one time emitting a brightness like that of gold, it sinks into a slender shade of the colour of honey. At another, with a blackness like that of a crow, it emulates the azure flowers of the neck of doves. Or now, anointed with Arabian drops, separated by the slender tooth of a sharp comb, and tied behind the head, it presents itself to the eyes of the lover. It then, like a mirror, reflects a more pleasing image. How beautiful when being thick it is agglomerated with prolific abundance on the crown of the head, or extended in a long series, flows down the back. Lastly, so great is the dignity of the hair of the head, that though a woman should be adorned with gold, rich garments, precious stones, and every other ornament, yet she would not seem to be decorated, unless her hair was gracefully divided. But in my Fotis, not studied, but neglected ornament, added elegance to her person. For her copious hairs, gradually falling pendulous on the hind part of her neck, and being afterwards distributed through the neck, and leisurely reclining on the flexuous border of the top of her garment, were, after being a little conglomerated in the extremity, fastened by a knot to the crown of her head. I could not, however, then any longer sustain the torment of such transcendent pleasure, but immediately gave her a most luscious kiss in that part where the hair ascended to the summit of her head. Then she turned herself toward me, and looking at me obliquely and with petulant eyes, So then, you novice, said she, you have taken a sweet, and at the same time a bitter draught. Take care, lest from the excessive sweetness of the honey, you do not procure for yourself the lasting bitterness of gall. Why do you say so, my delight? I replied, since I am prepared, being renovated, to be roasted by that fire, even for one kiss. And having said this, and embraced her more closely, I began to kiss her more ardently. And now she, co-germinating with me into an equality of love, exhaling from her open mouth the odour of cinnamon, and ravishing me with the nectareous touch of her tongue, I said to her, I shall perish, or rather I am already a lost man, unless you will be propitious. To which she replied, having again kissed me, Be of good courage, for I am enslaved to you by mutual desire, nor shall our pleasure be deferred any longer, but as soon as it is night, I will give myself to your embraces. It was scarcely, however, yet noon, when Byrrhena sent to me hospitable gifts, videte, a fat pig, 5 hens, and a cadus of wine, valuable for its age. Then I, having called Fotis, said, Behold, Bacchus, the exciter and armour-bearer of Venus, is come of his own accord. For the voyage of Venus alone requires such provision as this, videte, that through the whole of the wakeful night, the lamp may abound with oil, and the cup with wine. The rest of the day I passed in bathing, and afterwards in supping, for, being invited by the good Milo, I sat at his scanty table, as much as possible out of the view of his wife, in consequence of recollecting the admonitions of Byrrhena, and tremblingly cast my eyes upon her, as if I was beholding the Lake Avernus. But as I continually looked at Fotis, who waited on us, my mind was refreshed by the view. As it was now evening, Pamphile, beholding the lamp, said, It will rain abundantly to-morrow. And on her husband asking her how she knew that to be the case, she answered, that this was predicted to her by the lamp. At this Milo, laughing, said, We nourish in this lamp a great Sibyl, who sees from the candlestick as from a watchtower all that is transacting in the heavens, and therefore surveys even the sun itself. To this I subjoined, These are the first specimens of this kind of prediction. Nor ought it to seem wonderful that this flame, though small, and the work of human hands, should nevertheless have a recollection of that greater and celestial fire as of its parent, and through this should divinely presage and enunciate to us what the source of its existence is about to effect in the summit of the heavens. For with us at Corinth a certain Chaldean stranger now disturbs the whole city with his admirable predictions, and divulges to the common people the arcana of fate for the sake of gain. Thus, for instance, he would tell the day on which the nuptial knot would be tied, or the foundations of walls would be established so as to remain for ever, and what day would be auspicious to the merchant, or an anniversary to the traveller, or adapted to navigation. Lastly, to me inquiring of him what would be the result of this my journey, he answered, that it would be attended with many very admirable and different events. For, he said, that at one time I should obtain a sufficiently flourishing renown, and that at another I should write a great history and an incredible fable, and compose books. Milo, laughing on hearing this, says, Of what stature was this Chaldean, and what was his name? I replied, He was a tall man, and of a dark complexion, and his name was Diophanes. It is the same person, said Milo, and no other, who, having similarly predicted many things to many in this city, and gained through it no inconsiderable wealth, or rather a great sum of money, unhappily experienced an inauspicious, or that I may speak more truly, a cruel fortune. For on a certain day, when being surrounded with a great crowd, he distributed destiny to all around him, a merchant, whose name was Cerdo, came to him desiring to know what day would be the fittest to take a journey. But when Diophanes had selected and pointed out to him the proper day, and Cerdo, having opened his purse, and taken out the money contained in it, had counted 100 pence, which he intended to give him as the reward of his predictions, behold, a certain youth of noble family, coming behind him, and taking hold of his garment, embraced and kissed him most cordially. But Diophanes, having in his turn also kissed the youth, and at the same time desired him to sit near him, was stupefied, as it were, by the unexpected sight of his friend, and forgetting what had just then occurred, said to him, How long is it, my much wished for friend, since you came into these parts? To this the other answered, I came about the beginning of the evening. But do you also, brother, inform me in your turn, how it happened that you sailed so quickly from the island of Euboea to this city, and have passed over both sea and land. In answer to this, Diophanes, that excellent Chaldean, being deprived of intellect, and not yet himself, said, May our enemies and all those who are hostile to us meet with the like cruel and Ulyssean peregrination. For the ship itself in which we sailed, being injured by various storms, and having lost both the mast and the rudder, could not be impelled to the opposite shore, but was merged in the gulf. And we, having lost all our property, were scarcely able to save ourselves. Whatever we could scrape together, either from the pity of strangers or the benevolence of our friends, was all taken from us by a band of robbers, and my brother, whose name was Arisuatus, being the only one that resisted their violence, was unhappily slain before my eyes. While Diophanes was sorrowfully relating these particulars, the merchant Cerdo, taking up the money which he had designed to pay for the prediction, immediately ran away. Then, however, Diophanes, being at length roused from his stupor, perceived the injury which he had sustained through his imprudence, especially when he saw that all of us who surrounded him burst into loud laughter. But I wish, Lucius, that the Chaldean may have predicted what is true to you alone among all of them, and that you may be happy, and make a prosperous journey. During this prolix narration of Milo, I silently lamented, and was not a little angry with myself, that having voluntarily introduced a series of unseasonable tales, I had lost a good part of the night, and the most delightful fruit of it. At length, therefore, I boldly said to Milo, let Diophanes bear his destiny, and again expose to the perils both of land and sea the money which he may obtain by his predictions. But suffer me, who am still weary from the toil of yesterday, to betake myself quickly to rest. Having said this, I rose up and went to my bedchamber, and there I found a most elegant arrangement of delicacies. For the bed of the less male servants was laid on the floor, at a considerable distance from the door, in order, I suppose, that they might not be a witness of the nocturnal murmurs. A small table stood by my bed, sufficiently laden with the rich remains of the whole supper, and 2 cups already half full of water, only waiting for the admixtion of wine. Near these also was a stone bottle, the orifice of which gradually dilated, and from which the wine could easily be drawn. I was scarcely laid down, when behold, my Fotis, her mistress, having now retired to rest, approached, scattering roses upon the bed, some of which also she carried in her swelling bosom. Having likewise closely kissed me, tied a garland round my head, and strewed upon me flowers, she seized a cup, and pouring warm water into it, extended it to me, that I might drink. But before I had drunk the whole, she gently took it from me, and gradually diminishing with her lips what was left, and at the same time fixing her eyes on me, she sweetly sipped it, a second and a third time also, and frequently we pledged each other. End of Chapter 2, Part 1. Chapter 2, Part 2 of The Metamorphosis, or Golden Ass. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Metamorphosis, or Golden Ass, by Apuleius, translated by Thomas Taylor. Chapter 2, Part 2. It happened on a certain day, that Byrrhina earnestly desired me to take a small supper with her, and when I very much excused myself, she said she would never forgive me if I refused to come. I went therefore to Fotis to ask her advice, considering her assent as an auspicious omen, who, though she was unwilling that I should depart from her the breadth of a nail, yet she kindly granted me a little respite from our amatory war. But take care, said she, that you return early from supper, for a furious band of the most noble youth of the city disturbs the public peace. Hence you will everywhere see men that have been murdered lying in the middle of the streets, nor can the aid afforded by the prefect of the province, on account of its great distance, defend the city from so great a calamity. But the splendour of your fortune may create snares for you, and your being a foreigner may render you contemptible. Do not disturb yourself, I said, my Fotis, for I shall return early, not only because I prefer my own pleasures to the banquets of others, but also in order that I may remove your fear. Nevertheless, I shall not go unattended, for I shall carry with me the succour of my safety, since I shall have, depending from my side, my accustomed sword. Thus prepared, I betook myself to supper. There I found many guests, and as she was a woman of rank, they consisted of the flower of the city. The banquet was sumptuous, the beds were splendid with ivory, and covered with cloth of gold. The cups were ample, some of which were more precious than others, but all of them were equally beautiful. This was of glass, adorned with figures exquisitely wrought. There stood one of crystal, perfectly pure. Here was a cup of bright silver, and there of glittering gold. And in another place stood one of amber, admirably excavated, so as to be fitted for a drinking vessel. In short, whatever might be believed to be impossible to be effected, was there. The servants who distributed the food were numerous and magnificently clothed, and the delicacies were abundant. Virgins, elegantly ministrant, attended, and boys with curled locks and beautifully attired, frequently handed to the guests old wine in gems fashioned into cups. And now, the lamps being introduced, convivial conversation abounded, together with frequent laughter, liberal jests, and pleasant gibes. Then Byrrhena thus addressed me: Do you find yourself comfortable in our country? For I know that we excel all other cities in temples and baths and other public works. We likewise abound with provisions. Certainly we have here tranquil liberty, and the stranger who is intent on business may here find a multitude of men resembling those of Rome. But the unambitious stranger will find here rural quiet. Lastly, the whole province comes to this place for the sake of solitary pleasure. To this I replied: What you say is true, nor have I thought myself to be anywhere more free than I am here. But I am very much afraid of the dark and inevitable retreats of the magic discipline, for it is said that not even the sepulchres of the dead are secure, but that certain relics and fragments of dead bodies are snatched from the burning pyres, for the purpose of being subservient to the destruction of the living. And old witches, at the very moment of the preparation for a funeral, outstrip by the rapidity of their speed the burial of strangers. In addition to what I thus said, another person observed: Here indeed they do not even spare any of the living, and one whom I know, having suffered something of this kind, was mutilated in his face, which was everywhere deformed. In the meantime, unrestrained laughter diffused itself through the whole banquet, and the eyes of all the guests were turned towards a certain person who sat in a corner apart from the rest of the company. This man, being confused by the pervicaciousness of all those who were looking at him, and indignantly muttering to himself, was preparing to rise and go away. But Byrrhena said to him: Do not go, my Telephron, but stop a little while, and with your usual urbanity resume your narration from the beginning, that this my son Lucius also may partake of the pleasure produced by your facetious tale. To this he said: You indeed, madam, always preserve an inviolable probity, but the insolence of certain persons is not to be borne. Thus he, being moved with indignation. The urgent entreaties, however, of Byrrhena, who conjured him by her own life to give the narration, forced him at length to comply. Telephron, therefore, having made a pile of the coverlets, leaning on his elbow, and raising himself a little on the bed, extended his right hand, and composed the articulation of his fingers after the manner of orators. Having likewise shut the two lowest fingers, he expanded the rest in a prominent position, and gently smiling, with his thumb stretched out, began as follows: While I was yet a pupil, I went to Miletus to see the Olympic games, and as I wished also to visit these places of this famous province, having travelled all over Thessaly, I came with ill omens to Larissa. And while roving through every place, the money which I had brought with me for my journey being very much diminished, I was exploring some means of mitigating my poverty, I beheld in the middle of the forum a certain tall old man. He stood on a stone, and proclaimed with a loud voice: If any one wishes to be the guardian of the dead body of one deceased, he shall be well rewarded for the undertaking. Then I said to one that was passing by: What is the meaning of this proclamation? Are the dead in this place accustomed to run away? He answered: Be silent, for you are very young, and perfectly a stranger, and you are also ignorant that you are in the middle of Thessaly, where witches everywhere lacerate with their teeth the faces of the dead, and such conduct is to them the solace of the magic art. To this I replied: Tell me, I beseech you, in what does this funeral guardianship consist? In the first place, said he, you must incessantly watch through the whole night, with open and unwinking eyes, continually fixed on the dead body, nor must your sight ever be diverted from this object, nor in the smallest degree turned from it. For these worst of witches, having transformed themselves into any brutal body, creep in latently, so that they easily elude the eyes both of justice and the sun. For they change themselves into birds, and besides this, into dogs and rats, and even into flies. Then too they oppress the guardians with sleep, by employing dire enchantments. Nor can any sufficiently define the magnitude of the frauds which they devise for the sake of gratifying their libidinous appetite. Notwithstanding this, however, not more than 4 or 6 pieces of golden coin are offered as the reward of such a dangerous undertaking. And in addition to this, which I had almost forgotten, if he who watches does not on the following morning restore the dead body entire, he is compelled to repair the whole of whatever has been bitten and taken from it, with discerptions from his own face. On hearing this, I invigorated my mind with a masculine strength, and going directly to the crier, I said, Cease to proclaim any farther, a guardian is present, ready prepared for you. Tell me what the recompense will be. You will receive, said he, 1,000 pieces of money. But be very careful, O young man, to preserve the dead body of one of the principal persons of this city from most iniquitous harpies. You narrate to me, I said, absurdities and mere trifles. You behold in me a man of iron, sleepless, and certainly more sharp-sighted than Lynceus himself, or Argus, and one who is all eye. I had scarcely finished, when he immediately brought me to a certain house, the gates of which being closed, he introduced me through a narrow back door, and pointed out to me a bedchamber, which was dark in consequence of the window shutters being closed, and a woman clothed in a black garment weeping, near whom the crier standing said, This man confidently offers to watch the dead body of your husband for the proposed reward. But she, removing to each side the hair that hung down before her face, which even in sorrow was beautiful, and beholding me, said, Endeavour, I beseech you, to perform the office which you have undertaken vigilantly. Lay aside all care, I said, and only procure for me some overplus adapted to the labour of my undertaking. To this assenting, she hastily arose, and brought me into another bedchamber. There she disclosed with her hand a dead body that was covered with very white linen, in the presence of 7 witnesses who had been introduced into the room. And having wept for a long time, and desired those that were present to bear testimony, she diligently pointed out to them every particular. A certain person at the same time describing in a writing table the parts of the body, which she severally touched for that purpose. Behold, said she, his nose is entire, his eyes are in a sound condition, his ears are safe, his lips have not been violated, and his chin is whole. You, worthy citizens, be witnesses of this. And having said this, she sealed the tables and departed. But I said to her, Be so good, madam, as to order that all things may be procured for me, which are necessary to this undertaking. What are these? Said she. I replied, A large lamp, sufficient oil to supply it with, till it is daylight, warm water with wine vessels and a cup, and a tray furnished with the remains of the supper. Then she, shaking her head, said, Begone, foolish man, who dost expect supper, and the relics of feasting, in a house full of sorrow, and in which for so many days no smoke has been seen. Do you think that you have come hither to feast? Rather assume, as adapted to this place, sorrow and tears. And at the same time, turning to her maidservant, she said, Myrrhina, immediately give him a lamp and oil. And shutting me in the bedchamber, she departed. I therefore, being thus left alone to the solace of the dead body, having rubbed my eyes and armed myself to vigilance, soothed my mind by singing. When, lo, the twilight commenced, the night advanced, still deeper and deeper night, and at length midnight, and my fear became greatly increased. But then a weasel, suddenly creeping into the bedchamber, stood opposite to me, and looked very sharply at me, so that the little animal disturbed my mind by its great audacity. At length, however, I thus spoke to it. Depart, impure beast, and hide yourself with little mice that resemble you, before you experience our powerful blows. Why do you not go away? The animal fled, and immediately left the chamber. But directly after, a profound sleep suddenly merged me into its unfathomable depths, so that not even the Delphic god himself could easily distinguish which of us two that were prostrate was more dead. I, thus inanimate, and requiring another keeper, was nearly not there. Scarcely had the streperous song of the crested cohort proclaimed a truce to night, when I, being at length roused, and terrified in the extreme, ran to the dead body, and taking the lamp with me, and uncovering the face of the corpse, I scrutinized every member, and found all was right. When lo! the miserable wife entered, weeping, with the witnesses of yesterday, being very solicitous for the event. And immediately falling on the body, and kissing it frequently, and for a long time, she explored everything, by the testimony of the lamp. Then, turning herself, she called Philodespotus, the steward of her house, and ordered him to pay me, without delay, the wages of a good guardian. This being immediately presented to me, we give you the greatest thanks, she said, O young man, and by Hercules, for having so well accomplished this undertaking, we shall afterwards rank you among the rest of our domestics. To this, being delighted with the unexpected gain, and astonished at the sight of the glittering pieces of gold, which I frequently shook in my hand, I said, Indeed, madam, you may consider me as one of your servants, and as often as you may be in want of my assistance, confidently command it. I had scarcely thus spoken, when the domestics, execrating the nefarious omen of my words, took up arms of every kind, and pursued me. One began to strike me on the face with his fist, another on the shoulders with his elbows. By some I was kicked, and by others my hair was plucked off, and my garment was lacerated. And thus being mangled and torn in pieces by reproaches and maledictions, like the proud youth Adonis or Orpheus, the son of the muse Calliope, I was thrust out of doors. And while I recover myself in the next street, and too late call to mind my inauspicious and imprudent speech, and confess that I deserved to suffer even more blows than I had received, behold, the dead body was now carried out, accompanied for the last time by lamentations and clamour, and was brought through the forum with all the pomp of a public funeral, and according to the rites of his country, in consequence of having been one of the principal men of the city. To the side of the corpse came a certain old man, tearing his native hair, and seizing the bier with both hands, and with a voice raised indeed, but interrupted with continual sighs, he proclaimed, By your faith, O citizens, and by your public piety, give assistance to your murdered fellow citizen, and severely revenge a most atrocious deed on this abominable and wicked woman. For she and no other has destroyed by poison this miserable young man, the son of my sister, in order that she might gratify her adulterer, and invade his hereditary possessions. After this manner, the old man loudly uttered querulous lamentations, interrupted by sobs. In the meantime, the common people began to rage, and were impelled to a belief of the crime, by the probability of its having been committed. They clamorously call for fire, they demand stones, and they incite the boys to the destruction of the woman. But she, loudly lamenting, and adjuring all the divinities in the most sacred manner possible, denied that she had perpetrated so great a crime. The old man therefore said, Let us refer the decision of the truth to divine providence. Saclas the Egyptian is present, who ranks among the first of the prophets, and who agreed with me some time since, for a great reward, to recall for a little while the soul of this dead man from the realms beneath, and to reanimate this body. And having thus said, he brought into the midst of the bystanders a certain young man, clothed in linen garments, who had on his feet shoes made from palm leaves woven together, and whose head was entirely shaven. The old man likewise, having for a long time kissed his hands and embraced his knees, said, O priest, take pity on me, I beseech you, by the celestial stars, by the gods of the infernal regions, by the natural elements, by the silence of night, the Coptic enclosures, the Nilotic increments, the Memphitic arcana, and the Pharaic sistra. Give to this body a short use of the sun, and infuse a small portion of light in eyes buried in eternal night. We do not wish to resist fate, nor to deny the earth a thing which is her own, but we only request a short space of life, as a solace of vengeance. The prophet, being thus rendered propitious, took a certain herb, and laid it thrice on the mouth of the dead body, and placed another on the breast of it. Then turning himself to the east, and silently imploring the increments of the august sun, he raised the eager attention of those that were present to so great a miracle, by the form of such a venerable apparatus. I mingled myself with the crowd, and standing on a certain more elevated stone, which was behind the bier, I observed everything with inquisitive eyes. And now the breast of the corpse began to swell with respiration, the salubrious vein to have pulsation, and the body to be filled with spirit. The corpse also arose, and thus spoke to the young man: Why, I beseech you, do you bring me back to the offices of a momentary life, after I have drunk of the Lethean cup, and have swum over the Stygian marshes? Desist, I pray you, now desist, and suffer me to remain in my rest. These words were heard from the body. But the prophet, being a little more excited, said, Why do you not narrate everything to this crowd, and disclose the secrets of your death? Do you not think that the Furies can be called forth by my imprecations, and that your wearied limbs may be tormented? To this the reanimated body answered from the bier, and thus with a groan addressed the people. I was destroyed by the nefarious arts of a new wife, and being compelled to take an envenomed potion, I delivered to an adulterer my yet tepid bed. Then the egregious wife assumed confidence from the present circumstances, and resisting, with a sacrilegious mind, contends against her confuting husband. The vulgar are inflamed and divided into contrary parties. These contend that the most execrable woman should be immediately buried alive with the body of her husband. Others are of opinion that no credit should be given to the lying testimony of a dead body. The subsequent speech, however, of the corpse dissolved this contest, for again profoundly groaning, it said, I will give you manifest documents of unviolated truth, and will indicate to you what is known to no one else. Then, pointing to me with his finger, When this most sagacious guardian, said he, of my body, diligently watched over me, old enchantresses, ardently longing after the spoil of my members, and on this account having frequently been in vain changed into other forms, when they found they could not deceive his sedulous attention, having at length thrown over him the dark mist of drowsiness, and buried him in profound sleep, they did not cease to call me by my name, till my infirm joints and cold members struggled by sluggish endeavours to obey the mandates of the magic art. Then this man, who was alive indeed, but dead only with sleep, because he had the same denomination with myself, rose, ignorant of what had been transacted, on hearing his name, and spontaneously walking like an inanimate shadow, though the doors of the bedchamber were carefully closed, suffered mutilation instead of me, his nose first, and afterwards his ears, being amputated through a certain chink. And that other things might correspond with the fraud, they accurately adapted to him wax, fashioned in the shape of his mutilated ears, and provided him with a waxen nose similar to his own. And now the miserable man stands here, having obtained the reward, not of his vigilance, but of his mutilation. On hearing this, I being terrified, began to try my fortune. With my hand I take hold of my nose, it follows my hand, I touch my ears, and they fall off. And while I am pointed out by the direct fingers and oblique nods of those that were present, while there was an ebullition of laughter, I escaped between the feet of the surrounding crowd, wet with frigid perspiration. Nor, being thus mutilated and exposed to ridicule, could I return to my paternal abode, but with my hair falling on each side of my face, I concealed the wounds of my ears, and covered the disgrace of my nose with this linen cloth closely applied to it. As soon as Telephron had brought this narration to an end, all the inebriated guests were again dissolved in laughter. And while they asked permission to drink the health of their friends, Byrrhena thus addressed me: To-morrow comes as a day, which it has been usual to celebrate from the earliest infancy of this city, on which day we alone of all men propitiate the most sacred god of laughter with hilarity and mirth. Your presence will render him more pleasing to us, and I wish you could devise anything from your own proper pleasantry of a joyous nature in honour of the god, in order that we might, in a greater and more perfect degree, please so great a divinity. It is well, I said, and what you request shall be done. And by Hercules, I wish I could invent something very festive, which might excite immoderate laughter. After this, being myself distended with much wine, I immediately rise, through the admonition of my servants, who informed me that it was now night, and having hastily bid farewell to Byrrhena, I proceed homeward with staggering steps. And while we go through the first broad street, the torch to which we trusted was extinguished by a sudden blast of wind, so that, being scarcely liberated from the darkness of unexpected night, it was with difficulty and weariness that we could reach our home, our toes frequently striking against the stones. But when we now drew nearer to our street, behold 3 men of strong and vast bodies rushed with greatest violence against our gate, and were not in the smallest degree terrified by our presence, but frequently attacked it with a greater accumulation of force, so that to all of us, and especially to me, they appeared to be robbers, and of the most cruel description. Immediately, therefore, I seize a sword, liberated from my bosom, and which I carried with me, concealed in my garments, for these purposes. Without delay, I threw myself into the midst of the robbers, and plunged my sword profoundly into the body of each that presented himself in the contest, till at length they expired before my feet, pierced with many and deep wounds. And when I had thus fought, Fotis being awakened by the tumult, and having opened the gate, I entered into the house, breathing with difficulty, and wet with perspiration. Immediately also I delivered myself to bed and sleep, being as much fatigued with the slaughter of the stubborn robbers, as if I had killed the tricorporal Geryon. Chapter 2